Hey everybody, welcome back to 10% True. Just before you get stuck into this episode, I wanted to let you know that in 2024, I'm going to be republishing my book, Red Eagle's America's Secret MiGs. That's the story of the 4477th Test and Evaluation Squadron and the program Constant Peg that exposed American fighter aircrew to secretly acquired and operated MiGs in the Nevada desert in the 1970s and 1980s. The book's been out of print for a while, it goes for crazy prices online, but I'll be republishing as a softback exclusively through my website, 10percenttrue.com. If you're thinking about supporting the channel, or you'd like to buy the book for yourself or even as a gift, please do go and place a pre-order. I'll put a link in the description. All pre-orders are going to be 25% off, and I'll make sure I personally inscribe and sign your copy for you. Anyway, that's the plug for the book. I'll let you get back on with enjoying this episode. Take care. Tug, it's great to see you again. Welcome back to 10% True.
You too. It's been a while, hasn't it? But yeah, it's good to see you again, Steve.
Yeah, I didn't. We were talking before we hit record, and you were talking about it being a couple of years ago. You published your F4 book, your Phantom book, and then the Flying Instructor book that came after it. And I just thought, I can't believe it's been that long, but evidently it has. So it's been your return to the channel is overdue, but I'm glad we've made it happen. So it's good to see you.
Yeah, look at that. I've got a load more grey hairs and a few more wrinkles. So it's just good time to get me before I completely decompose, I guess.
Well, you look good to me, so.
Hey, look at that.
So for anybody who's listening, first of all, Tug did come on the channel. You need to go and check out Tug's F4. You don't have to do that. You know, Tug's basically sort of going chronologically through his career, but we're skipping bits here and there, and maybe we'll come back to those. So you don't have to go and watch the F4 interviews now. But that was Tug's introduction to fast jet flying, and he talked about that experience. I'm going to pick up where we left, which was Tug talking about leaving the F4 reluctantly. The RAF was retiring it. But the focus of today then is going to be to talk about Tug's exchange tour flying the F-18. So with that preamble in place, Tug, how did you end up leaving the F4 and what came next?
Yeah, so towards the end of the F4, young pilots like me, towards the end of their first tour, we were being offered 2 years as a sim instructor on the Tornado F3 and then eventually filtering through onto the aeroplane. And I just didn't fancy 2 years in the sim. I wanted to keep flying, so I was offered. My boss on 56 Squadron Phantoms was a real huge support for me, and he recommended me to go instructing. And I was offered the very last tactics instructor slot out of RAF Brawdy before it closed, always knowing I was going to move to Valley. And they were taking both TAC weapon schools from Chiver and Brawdy, mashing them together and taking it all up to Valley. And Valley was going to become the one Hawk station, doing convex onto the Hawk and then TAC weapons. So I asked if I could do that TAC weapon slot, and fortunately I was allowed to do that. The reason I took a TAC weapon slot and took the pain of going to live in North Wales in Valley, because it was pretty remote, and not the most welcoming place, I suppose, was that lots of people were getting exchange tours from TAC weapons. That was really pissing off guys on the front line. But, to be an instructor made you a bit more of a rounded aviator, had more to offer. And so lots of exchange tours were going from those slots. So I thought, if I'm going to get an exchange, that's going to be my best bet. So I took the pay, and holy moly, the thing came true. For once, my life plan worked out, and I'll remember the day till I die. I was sitting in the crew room at 74 Squadron at Valley, and the phone rang. Somebody took the call and said, "Oh, it's for you, Tug. Who is it?" As the station commander. At which point I went, "Yeah, screw that. We've all been spoofed like that before." And but I said it at the top of my voice. And as I got the phone, he said, "No, Tug, it really is the station commander." So, I sat to attention and said, "Sorry, sir." And he was kind of laughing because I guess he hears it all the time. And he said, "I've got a posting for you." And I figured, here we go, it's Tornado F3. And he said, "How does F-18s in California with the Marine Corps sound?" And oh God, I fell off my chair. And the guys who were in the crew room at the time, they saw this look on my face, and they knew something special had happened, and that was it. That was it was like Christmas, every birthday, winning the pools, winning the lottery, all dumped into my lap right there. And then, you know, I think it was 8 months before we were due to fly out that I found out. So there was 8 months of build up and excitement for it, plus all the other, I mean, God, the faff of moving your whole life out to a different country where there's just you and a contact at the embassy and your predecessor, and that's the only friendly faces that you know as you arrive. So there was all that kind of nervousness as well, and the usual crap that I had, which was my imposter syndrome telling me that I wasn't actually good enough to do it. I was going to embarrass myself, my Air Force, and my country. And but I tell you what, I quickly quashed that down because, you know, it was California, baby. You know, it couldn't have got any better, really.
Can you expand on that a little bit? That is one of the questions I was thinking of when you were describing the sort of ecstasy with which you received that news that you were going to go to California and fly the Hornet. You've obviously got 8 months to figure it out, but how soon did you realize that you were going to go to a Marine D model squadron where night attack presumably was the main role? You came from an air defense background, so how quickly did you figure out you were going to be doing the air to ground piece and the air to air, and what then was the process of you squashing those sort of doubts and fears?
I didn't know I was going to a D squadron until I arrived in California.
Really?
So before I went out there, my predecessor had been a ex-Phantom guy and a attack weapons instructor, and he was almost had legendary status. He was a very well-known guy and a very well-liked guy, but for good reason. He was absolutely super, and he was towards the end of his attack weapons career as I was starting mine. So again, whenever I got onto a squadron, I'd look at who was a couple of years ahead of me and think, God, if I can be as good as them by the end of this tour, this will be great. You know, I'll have achieved something. God, I didn't think for 1 second I could match him. He was so good. Anyway, he got in touch with me and said, I've just heard you've been named. There's a lot of stuff I want to go through with you beforehand, all the admin stuff to help you ease out here. And anyway, sorry, to answer the question, the job was supposed to be an OCU instructor's job, and that's what he started out as, was an OCU instructor. And he said, you know, I'm on this brilliant aeroplane and I'm doing next to nothing with it. He managed to wheedle himself onto a frontline squadron. He went on to 314, which are the Black Knights. You know, they're featured in Independence Day. They were kind of like the premier squadron at El Toro, which is where we were going to, and he'd whittled himself onto the front line. So it was single seats, multi-role, but you know, it's a Hornet, so everybody does air defense in it and air combat. So that's what I figured I'd begun. I'd be a one-for-one replacement with him. It wasn't until I got to the States that I found out that there was. I knew there were other exchange people there. There was an Australian guy, single seat guy, and there was a Brit backseater as well from the Tornado GR1. And in order to try and stop the drama of where do we put the exchange people, because every year to 18 months the squadron would deploy for 6 months, and we weren't allowed to deploy with them, so they'd have to move us around. And because I guess there was a backseater there, well, it'd be easy if we just kept them all on the same squadron. They were on 242, the Bats, and so, but the Bats were about to deploy, and they thought, right, we'll put those guys then onto VMFA 121, which were another twin-seat Hornet squadron. Oh, there's another Brit coming. We'll shove him on there as well. And it wasn't until I got there that I found that out. F-18D, right, its main job really, the thing that it excelled at was FAC-A, so forward air control airborne. Well, hell spells, I'd never done close air support in my life. I didn't really know what a FAC did. It's a night bombing squadron. Hell's bells. This is everything I've loathed in flying. Practice bombing for starters. And flying at night, I had a love-hate relationship with flying at night. It's beautiful when you're up there, but getting up there and getting down again is a pain in the ass. So I thought, oh my God, how the hell am I going to manage that? I think one of the first conversations I had with my predecessor when we arrived in the States was, he said, are you excited about this? I said, I'm absolutely beyond myself. I'll be honest with you, though. I'm shitting myself about close air support. And he said, shouldn't worry about it, Tug. He said, the kit's dead easy. The jet's dead easy. You'll have no worries whatsoever. And to hear somebody say that is a nice thing to hear. But when you consider that this guy is a superstar, it's a little bit meaningless, to me. But transpired he was absolutely right. It was hard work with close air support. Night bombing was scary as shit. I won't dress it up as anything else. But I'm still here. I managed to do it and managed to pass all the courses, and that was that. It's only afterwards you look back and you say, why were you so worried about it? But you do at the time. I think if you do worry about it a bit at the time, like I said, it's always induced me to work hard at trying to achieve, and maybe that was a good thing.
Can I ask you a little bit about the exchange then, the purpose of the exchange? Evidently, you're going to go over there and sort of bring some of what you know to them, and you're going to absorb some of what they know and bring it back to the UK. I guess that's the idea behind the exchange program. But
yeah,
but you're an air defence guy then. So what did they think? Yeah. What was the logic behind putting you then in the night attack squadron?
It's multi-role, and by the time, so that's why anybody fast jet in the RAF could have done that exchange that I did, because it's multi-role. Well, we could put a Tornado GR1 guy in there, right. And he'd be great at bombing, and he'd have to learn air combat. Put an air defence guy in there, and somebody who's taught air combat at attack weapons. When I arrived, this aeroplane was the best dogfighting aeroplane in the world. Now, you'll get lots of comments, I'm sure, on YouTube of people who've flown the F-16 saying, that's bullshit. F-16 was much better. Yeah, the F-16 is brilliant in air combat, but nothing could match this airframe in air combat. And if people were stupid enough to try and match us, then they got shot very quickly. If an F-16 fought the way an F-16 is supposed to fight, that was the hardest fight I ever had. And I'd win 50% of those fights, and 50% I'd get my ass shot off. So I think it was would be a bigger step for a ground attack guy to go to a Hornet exchange, just because of the air combat side of it. So I've forgotten what the original question was. This always happens, Steve, does it?
No. You've kind of answered it, because that was really the follow-on, which was, okay, so it's multi-role, so therefore you could take someone from any community, but which would be the hardest transition? And I guess you could, can you say dropping bombs is as simple as just some trigonometry, whereas the air defense role is a much more dynamic 3D chess piece, and if you're good at dropping bombs and you've got to learn the air defense piece, then that's the harder challenge. Would that be fair to say?
I would say that, but I would say that because I'm an air defense guy. Dropping bombs. I mean, come on, it's easy to hit targets and that's not moving, isn't it? Air defense, you have to build this. It is, and I like the analogy of the whole chess match, but it's a 3D chess match, and you have to take the data that you see on the radar, the data you hear in the radio, while you're flying in formation with and mutually supporting a formation that might be 5-6 miles wide. But the key element is you build the picture up here, and that picture then informs everything else that you do from then on. And we think completely in 3 dimensions. And going through training, I was kind of average to shit going through training. But then when I started TAC weapons and we did air defense and air combat, I kind of had a bit of a knack for this mental picture, I think, and mental processing and mental arithmetic, which when we did intercepts in the old days, it was all on mental arithmetic. So that skill gave me that kind of viewpoint. Now, when it came to bombing, look, like we say, we joke about it all the time. It takes an immense amount of accuracy to bomb successfully, I think, and you have to take in the fact that you're flying in formation and all of that stuff. And it's the same sort of raw skills, I suppose, but applied in a different way. And we are like chalk and cheese, I think, air defenders versus mud movers. We're different personalities, and we're just different people suited to slightly different things. That aeroplane, though, that made the other side of the fence a lot easier than it would have been in. Let's say I'd done an exchange onto ground attack Phantoms. My God, that would have been a nightmare for me. Because it demanded more raw underlying accuracy and skill, I think. The Hornet's kit was such that I think it covered a multitude of sins in air to ground for people like me.
That might be a good opportunity then, or the right moment to maybe talk a little bit about the Hornet and give us a technical breakdown on the airplane. I'm really keen to explore some of the themes you've just addressed, like how you would fight a certain aircraft. I'd like to understand the process of going out and becoming a FAC-A pilot, especially doing it at night. So if we park those for the moment, but maybe start them with an introduction to the Hornet. One of the things that really came through when we talked last time was your passion and your love of the F4. And I think you said to me that, you know, it might be because it was my first aircraft, but I would have, but the reality is I would have loved it as much anyway. And you know, you had was it Blue Mike, the aircraft that was painted up for you?
Blue Zulu,
Blue Zulu.
Yeah.
So you even had a particular aeroplane that you got to fly and that you were fond of. So it sounded to me like it was a difficult move for you to go away from the F4 and go to the Hawk at Broadie.
Yeah.
What were your initial thoughts the first time you walked up to the Hornet? What did you think?
Firstly, I couldn't believe how lucky I was. Secondly, if you kind of move left or right, Steve, you'll show that picture. It's a spaceship compared to the aeroplanes that were out there at the time. Look, an F-16 looks great, and so does an F-15, but nothing looks like the Hornet. I mean, Jesus Christ, look at it. It was otherworldly as I walked out of it. The first trip I did a backseat ride on the OCU. They call it the RAG, the replacement air group. So I did a backseat ride on the RAG before doing my first trip on the Hornet. So it's basically just sit there and soak it all up. Well, God, it's like I said, I couldn't believe I couldn't believe how it looked for starters. And then you get up close to it and you see its kind of pedigree. You know, it's a carrier aeroplane. So the nose wheel and the main gear, they look like they've been built in a shipyard. You know, there's an immense amount of kit just to stop the thing from crumping down on the carrier. The hook itself, I mean, it's like half a ton of metal. The shoe for the hook is that big, you know, and these are just the mechanical bits. When you climb in the cockpit, it was 3 beautiful displays plus a head-up display. I'd never flown a HUD before, and it started up. It generally never went wrong. And so when you taxied out following another aeroplane, you just thought, my God, it looked like an X-wing fighter from Star Wars. And then I sat there and I thought, never mind that one. I'm sitting in one right now. You know, they'll never take this away from me. Even if I fail the RAG and become an utter embarrassment to the Royal Air Force, I've flown in the Hornet now, right, albeit in the back seat. But look at this. And we went off, and I think we can talk about the RAG. You know, it was painfully slow was the progress to it. And I kept saying, you know, can I go flying, sort of thing. I think they got so sick of me, they put me in the back seat of one of the most violent trips that you did on the RAG, which was called low altitude training, and it was all very aggressive 3D maneuvers down at low level. And I guess they thought, all right, we'll shut him up. He'll end up throwing his ring up in the back there. But of course, I was a low level king compared to the Marines. We lived at low level. We taught low level at Valley. My God, I was whooping all the way through the trip. Didn't really, to tell you the truth, I didn't get a chance to manipulate any of the kit. Didn't even get my hands on the stick and throttle. But I just thought, my God, is the next 3 years going to be as fun as this? And then, you come back and you come back into land. They break into the circuit, put the gear down, and the head-up display changes to the landing configuration. And I looked at it, I watched him land, and I thought, do you know what? I could probably teach myself how to land this aeroplane in about 30 seconds because it was that easy. For somebody with, I've always said, with limited ability and even less confidence, I thought, God, I think I can. I think I might be able to do this, and that was it. And then I walked away from the aeroplane. I couldn't stop turning back and looking at it. That's the thing that I've just learned. It was beautiful. It was beautiful and not real. It just looked like it didn't belong on this planet, let alone in the air. I mean, it was just, it's gobsmacking. You can tell I'm a fan. Yeah.
So this is a bit of a funny question then. Maybe it's one for the end, but asking it now, so who cares? Did it change the way you felt about the Phantom?
No, it didn't. It's from a different era. So people always ask me, if you could have one more trip in any aeroplane you'd ever flown, what would it be? And I stand by it. It will be in Blue Zulu. The Phantom is one of my favourite navs in the back, and because that was it was my whole life. It was my whole being. Go to war in an aeroplane, it would definitely be the Hornet. So I had it was like I was a split personality. There was my past where I absolutely adored the Phantom, but that was in the past. That was a different generation and different era. And if you're going to have a love affair with something, right now in the moment, why wouldn't you choose the most exotic beauty out there? This was going to be some, essentially kinky relationship I was going to have with this thing because it did things that other aeroplanes couldn't do. It was in a different sphere.
Can you dive into that in a bit more detail then? The F4, obviously no bells and whistles in terms of flying computers, digital fly-by-wire, anything like that. It was as simple as you could get in a fast jet, I suppose. The F-18 was quite different then. So when you started flying it, what were your initial thoughts on it? And did those thoughts progress as you... So the question I'm asking in a very long-winded way is, do you, with the Hornet, because it has the fly-by-wire control system, you get to a level of knowledge quite quickly, and then that level of knowledge and sort of comfort plateaus for the next 3 years? Because once you know it. Or is it because it's fly-by-wire and so therefore it's telling you what you can do, what you can't do, you're telling it what you want, it will give it what it can? I'm guessing with traditionally sort of hydromechanical flying control surfaces and airplanes without fly-by-wire, you kind of have to tease out the envelope. You have to become comfortable with the different areas of the envelope over time, and maybe your level of sort of competency is more of a gradual curve over time. Does that question make sense? Is that
I have no idea what you're talking about, but let me try and pick the bones out a bit, Steve. So when I was on the Phantom, it's purely down to your ability, and your ability gets better and better the more that you fly, and then you get caught out by something and it tries to kill you, and you have a little bit of a reset in your mindset that maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was, so I'll try and build up again with that. It's exactly the same in the Hornet. It's just that whereas in the Phantom I was always acutely aware of where the envelope ended, and my skill would end as well, and where I would run out of talent. There were mostly on the Hornet. I wasn't even aware there was an envelope. There was, and I managed to fly outside of it one particular day and got caught out. But it just seemed to be that whatever I asked it to do, it would do. So the fly-by-wire thing's all well and good, but I think they called the Hornet, it was the first soft-winged aeroplane. I think that was how they termed it. So if I put an input in, say in a Phantom or a Hawk, I go left, there'll be a bit of aileron move, and aileron will go up and aileron will go down, and off goes the aeroplane. The Hornet, it doesn't quite do that. What you do is you put an input in, and the aeroplane decides which surface it's going to move. That could be aileron, trailing edge flap, leading edge flap, or the rudder. Those rudders, most aeroplanes, the rudder is a footrest in a fast jet. In the Hornet, it's an integral part of the flying solution. So if I wanted to go left, depending on what speed and what angle of attack I'm at, it might move a bit of leading edge type stuff. It might move the stabilators, the tail at the back. But then there'd be a whole shitload of rudder would come in. And I found it best that when I was maneuvering, not that I had the time to do it, not to look at what was going on the aeroplane, because that would just frighten you if you had a kind of test pilot brain, which I certainly didn't. I think it would be somewhat worrying to see how much of the aeroplane was actually moving to do that. So let me just give you one example of why I thought there wasn't really an envelope for me. So I was doing a workup on my first squadron. It was an air combat trip, and we ended up. I'll try to do this with hands. So I ended up quite, low speed and high angle of attack like this. I'll pull that back, and the other guy was going across on a 90 like that. So in order to get into his 6 o'clock in any other aeroplane, what I would need to do is roll right to go inverted and pull down, and then roll level and pull like a bastard to hopefully stick in his 6 o'clock. But I had no idea why I even tried it. We're at that point here, and I thought, well, he's going left and right over there. Why don't I just point the stick at him in the cockpit? And that's what I did. No, there's no reason to do this whatsoever. And I just shoved the stick front right, and the aeroplane did that. And I tell you what, I was so gobsmacked, I almost couldn't get the sight on to gun it. And my backseater, he was an air combat training instructor, he's quite a experienced Hornet guy, and he just said, "What did you just do?" And I said, "I don't know, but guns, knock it off." I said, and we got in the debrief, and he couldn't work it out, and I couldn't work it out. But he did say to me, and it was a good bit of advice. He said, Tuggy said that it was a great move, but you just don't get into your head that you can do that every day in the Hornet. It will catch you out at some point. But that day, it didn't catch me out at all. I've no idea what surfaces on the aeroplane moved to do that. But it was a bit odd to just point the stick at somebody and have the aeroplane put you exactly where you wanted to be.
You mentioned the high angle of attack. Then how high could you get? I mean, realistically, you're talking 35 units or 40 units. What?
So depending on the load, I think if we had, look, bottom line is they say that a clean Hornet is unlimited in angle of attack. That was it. So it's in the manuals, unlimited in angle of attack in clean fit. Well, this is years before you've got Su-27s and 35s doing the Cobra maneuver, and look what an F-22 does now. Well, the Hornet, I think, is the mother of all of those type of maneuvers. So it's unlimited in angle of attack, and then if you put maybe it was if you had a centerline tank on it, was 35 alpha, which was way more alpha than anybody else could take anyway. And then when we had rails on for bombs and various weapons, I think maybe it was down to 25 alpha in some fits. But that was something that you didn't even I didn't even process. So in the Phantom, you go above 19 units angle of attack, and the next thing is flick, stall, spin, crash, burn, die. And it was that's certainly in the circuit. What was it? 23 units outside. But if you put a bit of aileron in above 15 units, the whole thing would depart. Which is mad, absolutely mad. This thing here, oh God, you could be unlimited angle of attack, wang the stick around the cockpit as much as you wanted, and the thing would just try and please you. Like I said, it was just otherworldly.
I think the F-16 is limited to like 23 degrees. Well, three. It's not degrees; it's units, isn't it? So it's 23 units, I think, for the F-16, and then I think the Eagle is unlimited, but there's a practical limitation on it. One of the questions I was going to ask you around, and maybe this is a bit nerdy, a bit too sort of test piloty type question, but see if you want to answer it or want to have a stab at answering it. It's just disrupted airflow to the engines then. So one of the things you think about when you're talking high angle of attack is the disruption to the airflow, compressor stalls, that kind of stuff. You look at the intake designs of different aircraft. So the F-16 has that sort of shark's mouth, sort of quite a sharp lip underneath, but no, as far as I can tell, no infuse ramps or infusers or anything like that. The Eagle has the nodding intake ramps that help regulate the airflow to the engine. I think that's maybe more to do with helping to control supersonic airflow. The Hornet has these nice little sort of round, fat sort of lips. How does the airplane control airflow to the intake at those high angles of attack? And what devices are in the intake to help with supersonic flight? So slowing the airflow down to subsonic speeds before it hits the fan. I mean, that's a bit of a nerdy question, but I'm just curious.
So I think I'm going to disappoint you with my lack of knowledge here. It is a long time ago since I flew it. Bottom line, you said the F-16 is limited to 23 alpha and the F-15 block. Nobody cares, Steve. Because it's not a Hornet. I'm just trying to upset all the F-15 drivers who watch your channel. Right. So if I were to hazard a guess, there's a reason why those intakes are where they are and not right up the front where like they are in an F-16 or an F-15. So we had variable inlet ramps on the Phantom to kind of regulate the speed of the airflow into the intakes. I guess F-15s do a similar sort of thing. As far as I understand, there was nothing in the Hornet, and I imagine it's to do with the shape of those intakes, but where they're positioned as well. So this was proper Carefree handling in engine and airframe. I've never seen it before, but I guess that's what you've got now with these ridiculous aeroplanes like F-22 and Su-35. Sorry, I don't have the technical know-how to help you out with that.
Yeah, that's all right.
That's a proper nerd question, though. So you should be ashamed of yourself.
I'm asking for a friend. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Yeah.
Tell us just. I want to just stay with the handling just for a couple minutes longer. Yeah. So, could you tail slide it? Did you tail slide it? Were you?
I did.
The Dash 1 have any sort of prohibitions at all about manoeuvring?
I didn't tail slide it. I'm pretty sure that probably was prohibited.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't tell you definitively, but if it hadn't been prohibited, I would have had a go at tail sliding it. But generally, with this, no matter who we fought, we never fought anybody that could fly as slow or as much AOA as us. So you wouldn't. I wouldn't see any reason why you would get into a position where you would need to tail slide it anyway, unless you were doing Hornet v Hornet. Never got to that position, so I'm imagining it was that would be prohibited.
Okay.
Otherwise, you would have seen it. You would have seen it at an air show, and I've never seen a Hornet tail slide at an air show.
Okay. Okay, so can we move then on our sort of discussion of the Hornet as a machine and talk about the avionics? You've already referenced that a few times. You said the guy that you were picking up from said that it's a great aeroplane, easy to fly, the kit's easy to operate. You're coming from the Phantom. Well, you're actually coming from the Hawk, but your last operational type was the Phantom APQ 120. Sort of, it's a pulse radar, isn't it? I don't know if there's any Doppler.
No, we had PD. Yeah, we had PD. Doppler. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How then? And again, I'm not asking for a comparison, but I'm just curious to understand from an operator's point of view what the comparison was like going to the Hornet and the APG 65 radar. I think it was
73 as well.
73 as well. You flew with?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. On the RAG, I flew APG 73, and I think we must have had that on. We had it on the D model because we had TWIS, track while scan.
Yeah.
I think there were some APG 65s that were upgraded to track while scan. I might be bullshitting there, but yeah, I flew both. I flew APG 65 and the 73.
Can you tell us about those radars then? What were they like to operate? Were they, because one of the things that was curious was you said earlier about you had a knack for the mental arithmetic necessary to do an intercept, and I kind of get the sense that these modern, we're talking some time ago, but these newer radars take all of that away and they do all the calculations for you, and you're just you put a thing on a thing and then point the thing at the thing or whatever the expression is, and it does it all for you. Was it as simple as that?
No, it's proper fighter pilot talk. That is, put the thing on the thing and let the thing do its thing. That is pretty much what happened, relatively speaking. So, old days, a nav would hunch over a screen and watch this bloody blip, do a bit of blip trapping analysis. I'd try and back it up with mental arithmetic. And the bottom line was, why measure with a micrometer when you're cutting with an axe? That's what intercepts are all about. So I started doing the trainers in the Hornet, and I was, again, dear God, my birthday's come early, shapes. So I had a little 3-sided box, which was the target, and it had what was called an aspect vector coming out of it. This is stuff that we had to backplot from the compass on a raw radar from the Phantom. So aspect is, say I've got a box like that, and it's the aspect vectors coming out the bottom to the right. That means the bandit is looking out of his right-hand window at me, and the angle is the amount of angle off his nose that he is looking at me. So a 20 right aspect, he's looking basically over there to see me. And that's how we do intercepts with aeroplanes like this, with radars like this. We would have to backplot a track crossing angle from the compass and how far the blip had gone in the last 5 miles. And it was very complicated mental arithmetic. This was all done for you. And so what I ended up doing intercepts purely on the picture on the radar. And it blew my mind. I'd always do a little bit of backplotting, mental arithmetic, because I was used to doing it, and it's almost like checking your homework sort of thing. But you could do everything. So we play around with collision a lot in intercepts. So you pick a target up on the radar. If you can't think of what to do with it because it's 60 miles away, you put it on collision. So to put a 20 right aspect on collision, you put it 20 left on the scope. And it's as simple as that. You don't have to work out what heading you're going to fly to have this collision. You just put it 20 left on the scope. If he's a 30 left aspect, you put him 30 right on the scope, and you just use the picture like that. So if I want, normally, our main weapon in the D is an AMRAAM. If I want to fire an AMRAAM, I want about a 10 to 20 aspect. That gives a lot of closure for the AMRAAM, but it gives a little bit of offset for it to be able to track nicely, and that will be the perfect shot, a 10 to 20 aspect on AMRAAM. If a guy is a 60 right, let's say a 50 right, I'd put him 50 left on the screen to put him on collision, but he won't get any better. He'll stay a 50 right all the way down to the collision. That's not such a good shot for AMRAAM. So what I do is I squeeze him to 60 left on the scope, And if he's outside of his collision like that, his aspect vector will start to heat up. And when he goes to the 20, I put him 20 left on the scope, and boom, there's my AMRAM shot. It's now to people that have not seen that before or heard that before, that might sound really complicated. Trust me, for somebody who was pretty average, that's such a beautiful and easy way to do intercepts. We do intercepts where we do like a reciprocal heading and do a stern intercept to ID people. So we have a separation of about 5 miles, and we do that. It's called a 180 by 5. If you want to put somebody on reciprocal heading and he's 20 right aspect, you put him 20 right on the scope. So 20 right on the scope, he's on reciprocal, 20 left on the scope, he's on collision. That could not be any easier for somebody who's used to working out back headings and bearings and all that sort of stuff. So, but Steve, that's just the air-to-air radar. That's just one aspect of the air-to-air radar. We had track while scan. I'd never had track while scan before. So we were tracking 4 targets. You'd have 4 targets under the trigger, and you could just step between them in track while scan. Shoot, step, shoot, step, shoot, with the step button being on the throttle. So it was that sort of thing. And you got 4 AMRAMs in the air, and that would be your dream scenario there. So there was a like a sideways view of the intercept, if you like. So we'd have a classic, what's called a B scope, which I'm sure you're familiar with, square radar scope on the left display, and on the right display you could have a sideways view of the intercept, which would show you when people were about to go out of scan. So sometimes you'd lose somebody on the B scope and think, what the hell's gone on there? Is because you haven't motored the scanner up to keep him in scan. Well, that they called it the SA display, I think. That gave you the another kind of view of the intercept. You couldn't do the intercept on that display, but it helped you keep people in scan. So I thought, blimey, that's absolutely brilliant. And then there's a moving map. Oh my God, never had that before. That was talk about making aviation easy. We've got a moving map display. But you know what? Being the dinosaur that I was, I always planned a paper map as well, because when you plan a paper map, you're already lifting data off to build your situation awareness, and that's old aviation type stuff. With the point being, you have to be a pilot before you become a fighter pilot, and I think if you've got the piloting skills, the Hornet enables you to become a much better fighter pilot than you probably would have been in another aeroplane, because the kit was so intuitive for you. God, long answer.
It's a great answer. You could, Tug, if you want to keep talking like that all day, be my guest. That's fantastic. So some questions around that then. The obvious question that is springing to mind then is crew coordination. So in the F4, you've got this very intensive process of running the radar and plotting the intercept, and then being able to employ the weapons as a result of those things being done well. In the Hornet, you then got this backseater, but you've got a lot of automation, and you're able to apply your own rules of thumb and to run the intercept yourself. Are you doing in the Strike Eagle, for example, it used to be in the 90s, I think, the early 2000s, that the guy in the back would run the intercept all the way up till the merge, or 10 miles it maybe was, and then the guy in the front would take over the radar. That's changed now. I think the guy in the front does all the work with the radar now. So it changes over time. But when you were flying the Hornet, what coordination did you have with the backseat guy? Were you doing it all yourself? And what was that like?
Right. So from the outset, I want to say one thing at the top. I love the US Marine Corps. I absolutely love it. It got under my skin. The camaraderie, the band of brothers and sisters thing was everything to me. These are very important things to me. Colours of the squadron. There's a reason why the Marine Corps motto is Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Not just faithful, but always faithful. And I do. I absolutely adore the Marine Corps. They had some issues though with the way that they trained people. So on the RAG, I think there was a formal WSO course on the RAG, but if jets went down it was generally the WSOs that would lose out. And there were a lot of instructors on the RAG that had just come from single seat squadrons. And the absolute classic, and people always think this is made up, but I heard it from one of the WSO students on my course, came down after a trip, and he said, I was calling head-up speeds and altitudes while we were in air combat, and he just told me to shut the fuck up because I've got it on the HUD. And so there was quite a macho single seat sort of fighter pilot thing going on, and it's the one thing I think that that bugged me most about the Marine Corps, that I saw on the RAG. When I got to to my first squadron, 121, we had a brilliant boss, and the boss was a WSO, absolutely brilliant boss, an even better XO, who was a pilot, but they'd both been Phantom, Marine Corps Phantom, and so they ran the squadron. The general feeling was that this is a twin seat aeroplane. Let's make the most of everybody that's in that. So you would fly. I would fly with a variation of WSOs. Some of them were spectacular, and whenever I had one of those WSOs, I would let them. We ran it like a Phantom. They would run the radar. I'd concentrate mostly on looking out, trying to get tally with the bandits, maintaining formation integrity. And because I'd flown the Phantom, we had that instant kind of interaction between us. I then flew with some younger WSOs who came through, who just weren't up to the job. I flew with one guy quite a lot. He'd come from the OV-10, the Bronco, and he was a FAC-A. And at FAC-A, he was, outstanding. He was absolutely brilliant. But at air-to-air, he was hopeless. He had like a 300-knot brain in a 700-knot aeroplane, so he couldn't keep up with it. Now, I remember going flying once, and the leader of the formation saying to me, "You run the radar, Tug, in your jet, because he's not up to it." And I thought, well, how's he going to get any better? If we're just saying that every time you fly with this guy, you run your own radar, that's ridiculous. So he's just a passenger. We might as well solo the seat up and, save the weight. So I always tried to run my twin seat Hornet in the way that I would run any twin seat aeroplane. The problem with the Hornet is you can do everything from the front. There was nothing in the back that you couldn't do from the front, and so a lot of guys got that kind of two-wing master race thing going on. Fighter pilot, single seats. This is the greatest dogfighting airplane in the world, and it's all down to me. And that was the only thing I think that I was at odds. I was at odds with. So I always tried to bring those WSOs on, because in my early days, in every aeroplane, and the same in the Hornet as well, I needed bringing on by some of those experienced WSOs.
That sort of calls to mind some of the things that you were talking about. You talked about them in your F4 book, and you talked about them when you were on the podcast last time around, and that was some of the cultural behaviours towards certain personalities. And I remember you telling one story about a nav who was maybe struggling a little bit, and some guys, in the briefing process were arseholes to him basically, and you pulled one of them up afterwards in private and said, "What the fuck are you doing?"
Yeah.
So if these guys know that there's some navs who are struggling, are they also sort of giving them shit on the side? Are they just ignoring them? What culturally is the answer to the question which you posed, which was, if you don't talk to them about it, how are they going to get better? Do they just leave them?
Yeah, I think mostly it was in my experience, and this happened very rarely, Steve. Wasn't a huge cultural thing on the squadron, because the squadron ran really well. There were just one or two guys who weren't particularly good because they come from other aeroplanes. They weren't fighter WSOs. They didn't have that background. But it was, they didn't get shit from anybody about being rubbish. Debriefs were fairly direct, but not as direct as RAF debriefs, and that caught me out a couple of times as well. We're brutally honest in the RAF. There is a little bit of not upsetting people in debriefs in the States. That's not just the Marines; that's across the U.S. Air Force and the Navy as well. So, so there's a little bit of odds with that, but people wouldn't get shit for being shit. They'd just, but they wouldn't do anything to develop them either. As a general rule, there were plenty of pilots who were very good at developing WSOs, and I hoped I was getting into that bracket as well. So this one guy, this OV-10 guy, he was really weak in air-to-air. He couldn't build the picture, and so while I was doing an intercept, I was trying to demonstrate an intercept, what I was doing on the radar and the sort of calls we need to make and such. And then so I'd do one, and then he'd have the rest of them. And if we were a bit shit, we were a bit shit, but we debrief it afterwards as to why we were a bit shit. And I felt as though I was helping him. When it came to air to ground, I needed help from air to ground WSOs. You know, when I first started with that, and when it came to, I think I only did 2 trips of FAC-A in my whole tour. You know, and it's supposed to be the FAC-A aeroplane. Well, you know, I was basically just a driver, and those guys in the back were excelling, absolutely excelling. So there's give and take with that sort of stuff. But if you take the mindset that I can do everything in the front, it's easier just for me to do everything in the front. Then those guys are never going to get any better. But yeah, that's that. I think that was the only thing that I was really at odds with.
A related question, and you'll have to just inform me because I know I'm not very well informed, but I understood that Marine fighter pilots, so Marines are grunts first, aren't they? That's their philosophy. The philosophy is that they put a tin hat on them and a gun and they go and do their thing, and then their secondary thing might be they go and do a tour flying Hornets or whatever.
Yeah.
How did they build experience then in the Marine Corps sort of fast jet aviation corps or tranche, or whatever you want to call it, you know, because if you've got guys who are returning to infantry status or whatever it is after a fast jet tour, then presumably it must be difficult to build that experience and that corporate knowledge.
It's like doing a ground tour in the Royal Air Force, I suppose. Yeah, everybody joins as a Marine, which is why they have that ethos that the Marine Corps, the Corps is everything to them, and I do love that. But then we used to joke, we'd banter them all the time, you know, that you know, first one to finish his lunch in Marine Corps training, puts his hand up and all right, you can go aviation then, mate. You know, so we'd joke with them all the time about that. Not quite the case. They do intake aviators, but they all go through Marine Corps officer training first. So yeah, then they do a full flying training program allied with the US Navy. And then they get their airplane, the F-18, Avi-8B helicopters, or Charlie 130, I think Marines had at the time. Do a tour. Your next tour might be another flying tour, or it might be you're a FAC on the ground with a guy on the squadron had come back from a FAC tour, and then they come back and it's just like coming back from a ground tour in the Air Force. So I don't think there's anything particularly unusual about that, apart from the fact maybe there's more chance of you getting a ground tour as a US Marine than there is as a Royal Air Force pilot.
Okay, so they are in fact sort of professionally speaking aviators.
Yes.
Who then sort of not philosophically but in some senses practically have a sort of a fallback position of being a soldier or a grunt or whatever, an infantryman.
My second boss on 121 Squadron, he'd come from he might have come from 2 ground tours and then takes over as a Hornet boss. He was ex-Phantom as well, I think, or he might have been A6 or something. I'm talking out of turn, but I think he might have been new onto the Hornet as well. That might not be right, but there was something. He basically came from a ground tour straight in as Hornet boss, which I thought was a bit unusual.
You said, Tug, that dropping bombs at night scared you. Can you talk about the workup, the process to getting to the point where you're doing that night attack role then?
Yeah, I tell you what, you see a smile on my face. I don't know why I'm smiling. This is probably I'm going to have a sleepless night tonight talking about this. So my workup to do night bombing was the actual night bombing trip itself. So on the RAG, there was a funny thing with the RAG. So we're professional aviators, in the Air Force, and by that I mean I'm going to be an aviator. That's it. I'm not a Marine. I'm an aviator. That's why we have a Royal Air Force. Marines do more than just fly. So I was astounded on the RAG at the amount that they allowed students to do right from the offset. So there were two particular sorties that just bring a smile to my face. I'll get to the night bombing in a second if you like. This is a nice bit of shocking balance. So I go into the RAG one day, and it's we're doing strafe duel, but they've run out of 2 stickers for my course, and they want to get as many through as they can. And so there's a bit of conflab in ops, and one of them comes through and says, "Tug, you fired a gun before in an airplane, haven't you?" "Yes." "Bit more conflab." "Right, you can do it solo then." So the first time I fire the gun in the Hornet, pointing at the ground in a 15-degree dive, I'm going to do it solo. And I said, "Really?" And they went, "Yeah, okay." And that was it. I went out there. Now, when we do weaponeering in the Air Force at the range, we suck all the joy out of it. You know, we have to do academic circuit patterns, and it's all very accurate, and it's just it. And then you fire the gun, and some range officer tells you how many hits you've got over an acoustic scorer, and generally it's 0, and it just makes you feel shit, you know. Well, the Americans don't do that. They just launch you out to. We used a big range called the R2507. It's the Chocolate Mountains near Yuma and El Centro. And in there, they've dumped loads of tanks, vehicles, aeroplanes, cut some fake airfields out of the desert, SAM sites. You pick something, you have the whole range to yourself. You pick something, you set a racetrack up over it, and you just go and hose off bloody bullets at it. So, and there's no scoring. You just, they check your tape afterwards if they can be bothered. So I roll in. For the first time, I make the gun live. I pull the trigger, and it's got a 6-barrel electrically spun Gatling gun. I think low rate of fire is 4,000 rounds a minute, and high rate of fire is 6,000 rounds a minute, so 100 rounds a second. Nobody selects low rate of fire. It should be wire locked onto high rate of fire. So in the briefing, they don't call it high rate of fire, they call it rock and roll. So we set the gun to rock and roll, and I go in on this tank column, and I pull the trigger, and all I hear is this, as 80 rounds went down range. And they were high X as well, so they all had little bombs in the noses of every bullet. Recover the aeroplane, drop the wing to have a look, and there's all this crap going off like that. Well, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, but I thought, God, they're letting me do this on my own. A, I'm a foreigner. B, I've never bloody strafed in the Hornet before. And C, the range is, I mean, it's like the Wild West, you know. So I was, you can imagine, I was buzzing coming back from that. A couple of days later, now we'll suck the joy out of you, Tug. Night bombing. So it's the second time we've flown at night in the Hornet. We did a night dual check, just a bit of instrument flying and general handling. And then our second trip at night as students is night bombing. 30-degree dive bombing at night. There was a US Navy guy leading us, 3 solo students, US Navy instructor leading us. My God, he was, you know the chewing tobacco, they call it dipping. And my God, he was chewing tobacco like you read about, because he was shit scared that we were going to hit him. And the brief was basically, don't hit me. Guys, I'm asking you, don't hit me. You don't have to be in close formation at night, go into the range and back. Just don't hit me. I thought, well, this is really inducing a bit of confidence in us. And we went off, we got practice bombs, 26-pound practice bombs. We set up the racetrack pattern. Oh my God, that you can't see the target. There's like a crucifix of lights, but not very many lights. And somewhere in the middle, there's a big black hole. That's where the target is. And you aim for the middle of the black hole. There's no light on the target. 30-degree angle of dive, pulling up into the pattern, trying to avoid the other 3 aeroplanes. Absolute bloody madness it seemed to be. and we all did it solo for the first time. So the workup was the trip itself.
That's crazy.
It was mad, absolutely mad.
What was this? This predates night vision goggles. So you're doing.
Oh yeah, no gogs, no, none of that.
So how did you deconflict then? Are you doing it? Are you in altitude stacks, or you're just timing?
We did the pattern is the pattern, so timing. So you listen out. You can hear somebody calling hot when they're diving. I think you had to call downwind as well. So it's like being in the circuit at the airfield.
Wow.
You're listening out. You can see the flashing lights of the aeroplanes, but this is where the accuracy of your pattern comes in, and the speeds and maneuvers and such. Yeah, it just and we did a lot of close formation at night, but we did close formation as a 4-ship on the way to the range. I mean, it's not like we're flying through cloud and it's shit weather in the UK. It was, beautiful clear nights and such. So not, I say not quite the drama that I'm making it sound, but it bloody was. It was mad on a scale I'd not seen before.
Did you say you only did 2 of those trips in the time you were there? Did I hear you right?
No, I did 2 FAC-A trips. Where we're calling attacks onto other types. No, I did a fair bit of night bombing, but proper big bombs as well at night, and you could see the flames of the frag pattern as these 1,000-pounders went off. It was spectacular. It really was.
Did you get comfortable with that? One of the things that's always curious about talking to or listening to Navy aviators talk is that they never really get comfortable with landing back at the boat at night. That's the scariest thing they'll do. And if they've gone out on a combat operation and they've dropped bombs and been shot at, that's the scariest part. They don't get used to it. It's the same every time. Did you become habituated to dropping bombs at night?
I think I did, to tell you the truth, which is, but always an appreciation of, that they have these things called, they call them Z diagrams. So there's a diagram like that. The bottom line is your no-go below height, I think, or maybe the height of the frag pattern. There's a line in the middle, which is your recovery height. The angle there is the angle of dive, and the top is your starting height. So the Z diagrams are worked out, Z diagrams we call them, wouldn't we? They're worked out to make it academic and to give you numbers to hang your hat on and to make sure that it's safe. If you brief up and to do any sort of bombing and don't brief the Z diagram, then hell's bells. You're rolling the dice, really. So there is an academic way of doing all of these things. Always had an appreciation whenever I was hurling my body at the ground. Always had an appreciation of how dangerous this thing was. Another bloody solo trip I did on the RAG, 60-degree angler dive bombing. It was called high angle dive, and it was 60 degrees. It was like Stuka attacks. I mean, the bombs are dead accurate when you're doing them at that thing. But yeah, I did that solo as well. Yeah.
Wow. Did you drop just dumb bombs then, or were you training with LGBs at this? Did you go on to train with LGBs the night?
Do you know what? I never did an LGB in the whole of my tour. We carried dummy LGB seeker heads and stuff. So I did a couple of those things, but we weren't dropping stuff. We were just simulating dropping, which did nothing for me. We did lots of practice bombing with the 26-pound bombs. That's like they might as well describe it as it's like a mad dog shitting. They go all over the place because they're not ballistically sound. And we used to have a second part of my tour. I was on a reserve unit. The boss of our reserve group is a very, very well-known and well-loved Marine, but he was a proper fighter pilot. So before going out for a practice bombing trip, he'd take a pair of bloody grips and he'd bend the fins on other people's bombs because there was always a bit of competition with the stuff. Always a bit of competition. He'd bend the bomb so that he'd always win. And you just think, bloody hell, this is brilliant, that. But and so they go all over the place with those bombs. Not supposed to, but generally they would. And I was shit at bombing. But when you dropped a big one, so I dropped a lot of inert 500-pounders. They're coloured blue. They've got no warhead in them, but they behave like a 500-pounder. So they're quite accurate. They go where you drop them. And then, but I did more live than inert. But God, we dropped. We had a surge ops 3 weeks, I think it was. We'd handed a load of bombs back to the Marine Corps because we couldn't drop them. We didn't have enough people to drop them. And the Marine Corps went, well, they're all going out of date, so it's easier for us to drop them than it is to decommission them. So here's all your bombs back. We got £200,000 worth of bombs, and we had to drop them all in 2 weeks. And we went surge ops. Christ, I was dropping eight 1,000-pounders in one stick,
Really?
Like that. And you can imagine the massive bloody bang that those made. So that was interesting. Yeah, I did a lot of live dropping, but not what you would call special weapons. So things like I didn't drop an LGB. I didn't drop a JDAM. I didn't drop a walleye. Rock eyes. They still had cluster bombs in those days, so I didn't manage to get that. I watched somebody drop napalm. My God, that was something. That was something else. But I didn't. I only did, what you would call traditional bombs, I suppose. And shot a couple of AIM-9s as well.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah, and lots of bullets in the gun.
So you got to Wessop for that? Did you go to Eggman to shoot the AIM-9s? Or
we did it over the Pacific.
Did you?
We just picked a training area over the Pacific. This is, oh God, I adore the Marines. I adore the Marines for the way that they just crack on and do stuff. We launched one guy who had a rail full of parachute flares, sent him off to one end of the range. He goes across and drops a parachute flare, and we're all raging in at just under the MAC to fire AIM-9s at this parachute flare.
Wow.
So and we're all saying we've got tone on this thing. This plaintive voice goes, just wait, like that, as he's trying to clear the area as quickly as he can. It's proper Wild West stuff. We've just launched these bloody AIM-9s and downrange they went. Yeah.
Let's get back then to talking about the FAC-A mission. So you've already said that you only did, sort of a very small amount of work, or you only spent a little amount of time actually doing that. But can you just give us a brief on what I don't know if the Marine Corps call it a doc statement, but the purpose of the squadron, what they're supposed to be doing, what sort of scenario you were expecting or you would have expected to be doing FAC-A in? Was it permissive, non-permissive? Were you supporting Marine beachhead landings? What was it all about?
So I think so my first squadron in the States, first half, was this nice attack squadron, VMFA 121. But it was because we had the WSOs in the back. It was this whole thing of there's this extra job that we can do particularly well, which is FAC-A. As far as I understood it, if you took an F-18D to do FAC-A, it didn't just do FAC-A. It was a capable war machine just on its own. So it could go into, I figure, any environment that the package is going into. So it's across enemy lines, bringing in other Hornets, other Aviat-Bs from the Marine Corps, but then other things from the US Air Force and the Navy. And so this true multi-role aeroplane, but not forgetting its own capability. Now, as I've said, I only did a couple of training trips at FAC-A, and tell you the truth, it didn't really do anything for me. Watching other people come in and bomb stuff that we could have bombed ourselves, wasn't really my bag. But if I can just tell you this story, it's nothing to do with me, but our XO on 121 Squadron, I think is one of the most if I can describe him this way, his personality was one of the most beautiful personalities I've ever seen in a military aviator. He was such a nice guy. He flew my first trip on 121 when I arrived. We were doing my first trip was a 2v2 intercept trip, and he ran the radar as I would expect him to do. And on the last intercept, I said to him, they made us use people's call signs. It's a way of getting rank out of the cockpit, but I couldn't quite get my head around it. So I was still calling him sir because he was a major. And I said, would you mind if I had a go on the radar for the last intercept, sir? And he went, what did you just say? And I thought, oh God, I've upset him here. So I just wondered whether I could have a go on the radar. And he said, Tug, he said, nobody's ever been that nice to me in the cockpit before. Normally it's my radar, like that. And he couldn't stop saying it. He said it like 3 times in the debrief, how polite I was and how he always wanted to fly with this polite British officer and such. Anyway, he and another pilot, this is not my story, but he told it so well when he came back, were sent up to, I think it was some headquarters thing at Monterey up, a bit further north in California, to do a tabletop exercise that the Marines called and Navy called the puffer board. So it was a huge table apparently, and had control positions around it. And they brought in various aircrew and ground tank people and such, and they stood at these control stations. And then there was an admiral running the whole thing, and they ran this whole tabletop exercise. It was supposed to take 2 or 3 days, and it was generally a push from the beach, landing troops, Marines and Navy, and coming all the way across the board. And this thing was, I don't know, 30, 40 feet long or something, whatever it was. But it's called the puffer board because if you put in on your little control panel, a thing would light up on some of the targets. And I don't know whether there was a puff of smoke, that it was being attacked. That was why it was called the puffer board. So this Wizzo, I don't mind using this. Such a nice guy. Henry was his call sign. I went up with a younger pilot, and so they start the exercise. They've done all the briefing, start the exercise. Anyway, as soon as the exercise starts, this light comes on this tank column, and the admiral goes, "Stop the exercise." Okay, right, what's going on there? And Henry went, F-18D, Admiral, calling in another load of F-18s, we're doing FAC-A, calling in F-18s to that. Very good, make a note of that, and right, start the exercise again. As soon as it starts again, the light comes on. Right, who's doing that? So in between times, the Admiral has said, right, there's no more F-18s in the area, just the FAC-A aeroplane. Right, fine. Okay, right, stop the exercise, who's doing that? F-18D again, sir, we've brought in a 4-ship of AV-8Bs. And he goes, very good, make a note of that. Right, no more fast air. All right, just the FAC-A aeroplane. Okay, start the exercise. Light comes on again, and it goes on like this, and he's getting more and more irate as this admiral, because his big set piece exercise is getting screwed over. And he starts going, God damn it, who's done this? And it was Henry every time. And he said, right, what have you got now? He said, well, I'm calling in naval gunfire. Now I've seen that done as well from a FAC-A aeroplane, and it was spectacular. Naval gunfire is spectacular. So he goes, right, so no more naval gunfire there. You got nothing else to call in. And he's just expecting them to stand there for 3 days doing nothing now. So, right, start the exercise. Boom, boom, boom. God damn it, who's doing it now, And Henry goes, F-18D, sir, we've got our own bombs. Right, you've got no bombs on your aeroplane. Next thing was they were using the rockets that they used to mark the target, the Willie Pete rockets. And this guy is just going, God damn it, who the fuck is it now? Like that. And then the final one, the exercise is no more than 30 minutes old. Final one, Henry's got this big smile on his face. The light comes on. Right, what is it now? And Henry goes, we've got the gun. And this admiral went, right, you two, fuck off. and basically throws them out of the exercise, and they've only done 1 hour of this 3-day exercise, and he's thrown out the F-18 because it's supposed to be a FAC-A aeroplane. It's called in all this stuff, and then when there's nothing else to call in, it does its own thing. And they got sent back to Miramar 3 days early, and he told this story in Met Brief, and we were crying with laughter. He told it a lot better than I did, but I guess it showed the capability of the aeroplane, even when it was supposedly just a FAC-A aeroplane on that exercise.
Speaking of banter and things like that, I think again, it's because it's been such a long time since we last talked. I think it was you said to me that your squadron didn't have like your F4 squadron didn't have a Top Gun board for air-to-air kills. It had a banter board. Did you say that to me? Or
yeah, that was on my Tornado F3 squadron.
Was that on your F3 squadron?
I was so depressed on that squadron. I had to do something to alleviate the tension. So I started a banter league table. Yeah.
Did that carry over? Did that kind of thing carry over to the Marine Corps? I mean, they obviously seem like very serious professionals, but they obviously, those communities are those communities. So banter probably is part of it. What was the quality of the banter like there?
So there was a mix really, in that there were times when you could banter mercilessly, but there was a very, very set changeover with all Americans. That I think there was a lot of their banter is different from ours, and their use of language is different as well. They're shocked by some of the language that we use, and yet they use words that you couldn't even imagine that they could come up with. So generally, with the Marines, we always say that the Royal Air Force is more aligned with the Marine Corps than with the US Navy and the US Air Force. It just is. We're almost like brothers and sisters in arms with our outlook and our banter. Then we work against the US Air Force. Oh my God, those guys, they were mostly banter vacuums, the ones that we came across. If you bantered them, dear God, there'd be a bit of a crinkle and that would be banter denied from then on. Generally, the Marines pretty good with it. But we had an Australian exchange guy on the squadron with us. His banter was, I think, at best criminal. At worst, I mean, downright seriously offensive. But we loved him nonetheless. I absolutely loved that guy. But he was I would say he was a walking hand grenade, but he was a walking 1,000-pounder because he would just say stuff that even I would go, ouch, dear God, how is he getting away with that? But we kind of got away with it because we were foreign, and therefore we were supposed to be a bit different. And I enjoyed being in that sort of mindset and frame of mind with them.
You started, an hour or so ago, quite strong out the door by talking about how the Hornet was the best. I don't know if you call it a fighter or dogfighter.
Dogfighting, yeah,
best dogfighter. Yeah. So, and you talked a bit about how the F-16 guys might take issue with that. But can you talk a little bit then about how you would go about fighting other types in the Hornet? So I'm really keen. I just had a really good friend of mine, a guy called Disco Dildy on. He flew the F-15 for a long time, 20 years, and he's given us a really good breakdown of how he would fight F-16, F-18, and he's been honest about it. So he talked about flying against the F-16, it would generate 30 degrees of angle on you at each merge if you were in a two-circle fight. So at the second merge, you probably want to leave the fight, from an Eagle pilot's point of view, because you're not going to win. How would you win or lose against the different types of fighters that you flew against? What sort of lessons did you learn?
So I did a lot of DACT when I was there, especially the second half of my tour. So I ended up flying single-seat Hornets on a reserve unit for my second part of my tour, because 121 deployed to Iwakuni and we weren't allowed to go. Spent a couple of months on the ground, which was pretty grim, and then they found me a slot on this reserve unit, and it was almost like, I suppose I felt like it was a bit of a dumping ground. Let's dump the Brit over there because it doesn't really matter. Well, it did matter because I had the time of my life on that squadron. Most of our Hornets were brown, so we had brown camo. So everybody wanted to fight against us because of Iraq. So we did a shitload of DACT against lots and lots of different types. Now, from the outset, I just want to say for all of the nerds out there that are going to talk about energy management diagrams and rates of turn and G and stuff like that, I'm not that guy. When we do 1v1 air combat against another aeroplane, it's not real. Okay, we know we're not going to go into war. You know, they're not going to send up their champion to fight against our champion. We'll kill one person and then the war is over. We know that it's not jousting. It's not that sort of thing. So when it comes down to it, 1v1 is a bit of, you know, what's up here and what's in here with you. This is about your reputation. It's not about tactics. It's not about, you know, this is what will happen when the balloon goes up. When the balloon goes up, we're all going to hide behind the 8-ship of F-15s, all right? They're going to shoot belt-fed AMRAAMs downrange, kill everybody, and if they don't kill everybody, they'll get killed, and then there'll be another wall of F-15s. And what we'll do is we'll use up all the F-15s and AMRAAMs in the first few days of the war, and then we can all get on with the war properly after that. So when we do 1v1, it's a handling exercise, but it's an attitude exercise as well. So I don't want, you know, people kind of writing in saying, well, that wouldn't happen for real. You're damn right it wouldn't happen for real. So what I'm about to do is I'm about to fight just me against one other person. It's like playing tennis against them or boxing or something like that. And you want to win. And you want to win by any means whatsoever. The fight starts. This is what I gave a briefing on air combat to the Marines on my first squadron because I had a slightly different view on it. The Marines, it's not quite like this, but they're very much, as all US fighter pilots seemed to be at the time, on numbers. It's about the energy management diagram. When we merge, what is the absolute best speed at that altitude to merge to go into a rate fight where we do a two-circle fight like that? What is the best speed to merge where you don't turn across the nose? One of you reverses and goes into a single circle fight where it's about nose pointing and stuff like that. How much of the vertical do you use? What speed coming out? Well, you can do it all on numbers. That's what they tried to teach. When I was doing my air combat workup on 121 Squadron, I had a newly qualified air combat training instructor in the back, a WSO. He'd just come back off the course, and they gave me to him for this trip. And I was flying against the training officer on the squadron, and they called it a yardstick Hornet. You merge at a set speed. That's the yardstick Hornet. And my WSO afterwards said, we're going to merge as a yardstick Hornet tug. And then this is what he said. He said, I will allow you a speed excursion of plus or minus 50 knots on that yardstick Hornet throughout the fight. And I went, okay, what happens if he goes vertical and goes really slow? Well, we will rate around that. I said, no, what will happen is he'll turn down on us and he will shoot us and kill us. I said, look, we'll fly whatever speed we need to fly at that point in that all right, I'll merge at a yardstick Hornet if that's what you want. But that only works for one particular opening there. So let's see what goes on. Now, this story will make me sound like I'm an air combat god. I'm not, okay? But what we taught was look out of the window and fly the picture that you can see and try and dictate the fight. Try and make the picture fit what you want it to do. That's not always on numbers, okay? So we did this trip. We did 3 splits, 3 fights, and I shot the training officer down 3 times. The first fight lasted less than 40 seconds because he was expecting me to do a yardstick Hornet and all that sort of stuff, and I didn't. I just went straight vertical at the merge, and then kind of pirouetted down on top of him and shot him. And the second fight was very similar. The third one lasted about a minute because I thought I won't use any more missiles. I'll try and gun him, you know, just for the practice of it. Now, again, I'm not trying to be arrogant there, but he was flying a yardstick Hornet on numbers. My WSO in the back, he was going apoplectic, you know, because we were down at 100 knots at one point, in this fight, which was about 250 knots away from the yardstick Hornet that he was desperate to hold on to. But when we got in the debrief afterwards, it was people were saying, the training officer and my WSO were saying, what energy package did you have at this point here? I said, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know what speed you were doing? To be honest, I was busy gunning you at the time, and I wasn't being arrogant with that. It was just what it was. So, but they were insistent on having to know what your energy was at each point. We didn't teach combat like that. So when I went against a US Air Force guy who was even more able than a Marine Corps guy, then there was an awful lot of latitude in there for me to use this spectacular aeroplane and its airframe to do things that that they weren't expecting us to do. And I think right in my early days, I caught out lots of people, caught out an F-14D crew by just doing something unusual. And don't get me wrong, I'm willing to cheat in 1v1 if I can. It's part of the mindset. Yes, it's not real. Yes, you can't cheat against the Russians, and so this is not real. It's 1v1. So so the fight starts when you're going flying the next day. When you see the name on the board against you or the aeroplane on the board against you, that's when the fight starts. Okay, so I'll go and say to people, if I've not fought against an F-16 before, you fought against an F-16. What do I do here? What are they going to do? And this, and this. Now, F-15 against Hornet, I never had a problem. I never lost a fight against an F-15. Okay, just because the Hornet was much more maneuverable in 1v1. F-16s, we were about 50%. Sometimes I'd win, sometimes I would lose. If an F-16 guy came in and flew his F-16 the way he's supposed to fly it, then I couldn't beat him. That was the bottom line. That aeroplane, it fought differently from the Hornet. It was a brilliant raid fight. 9G, holy shit, and like you said, the F-15 guy said they would get 30 degrees at each merge, just because they would rate around the fight. If an F-16 guy was stupid enough to follow me into the slow speed thing, which is what I always tried to drag it against an F-16, then he would die. If he didn't get caught out by that, I had nowhere to go after that. But I always thought that was my one shot at beating an F-16, was to try and drag him into my arena, which was slow speed, very maneuverable, lots of nose pointing stuff. But if an F-16 flew the way an F-16 is supposed to fly, and I've done that whole roll the dice, I got one shot at this, I was absolutely screwed after that. Which makes you kind of think, why don't you fly the F-18 yardstick Hornet and blah, blah, blah? Because an F-16 will always beat it if you try and outrate it and try and fly your best Hornet. And the bottom line is, I didn't have enough hours on the Hornet to be that good and fly it that accurately. So I had to think a little bit more laterally with it. Mostly I was okay. All right, I did okay and got a bit of a reputation. I think built a good reputation. And then I started to believe my hype because every time I flew the single seat Hornet against an F-15, it was dead easy. We flew against the F-5s all the time. It was a tricky fight, but normally you should win that. And even against people on the squadron, I generally hold my own. And then I had a very, very humbling experience. We had a guy join the reserve unit straight from being a Top Gun instructor. And I thought, yeah, Top Gun, big deal. They do a lot of air combat, but I've fought against Top Gun graduates and beaten them and been beaten by them, so it's not all that. So I took this guy out, led him out to do a 1v1, cheated on the first split, set everything up so I had all the advantage, and it was all over me like a cheap suit. It was a very, very humbling experience. No matter what I did, I couldn't even get neutral with him, and that to me showed what somebody who was very, very good at handling the aeroplane could do. He could go into any arena and hold his own, whereas I had a few tricks up the sleeve, and when you came up against a proper, he was 2,000 hour guy, but I reckon I could have. I had 400 hours at the time. I reckon I could have had 4,000 hours, and he would have beaten me up. He was that good. I think what annoyed me the most, Steve, was that he didn't have to cheat. He was that good. He just beat me because he was brilliant and I wasn't. And that's 1v1. It's not about reality. It's just about that personal fight.
What did he have then that you didn't? And or put another way, what was it that he was doing that you couldn't?
So first off, I would suggest that he'd he'd spent every single minute that he was quite an intense guy, nice guy, but quite intense, very, very ultra professional. But I got the impression that was his life. He every minute he'd spent airborne was culminating in that trip against me. He'd learned something in every minute of every trip that he had ever flown, and that was that. He was just that kind of dedicated guy, whereas I wasn't. I had a lot of fun when I was flying. I think I was professional. Yeah, I did some things that weren't particularly professional, or part of being a fighter pilot, I guess. But I wasn't as dedicated as that. I mentioned the hours not because he had 2,000, I had 400. There's no way I could have beaten him. I could have beaten him if I'd have been better, but I wasn't better. So whereas I didn't think there was an envelope with the Hornet because I only got caught out once with it. He knew every inch of the envelope and where he could squeeze it, and because he taught it for 3 years. He taught the edges of the envelope for 3 years, and he'd accumulated all of that knowledge and skill and handling, and he was just better. He's the best fighter pilot I've ever seen in my life.
A question then. I obviously mangled my question about the sort of the interface between the pilot and the machine, and how you feel flying the airplane and building expertise and being able to sort of, as you described, squeeze the envelope. I mangled that question earlier, but I think I'm going back to it again. So do you feel connected to the airplane? I just interviewed a Canadian Hornet pilot who said to me, one of the things that was noteworthy about the Hornet was that you could get slow and not really realize it. You would suddenly become familiar. You'd suddenly become aware of a rumbling, which would be the alpha changing, and now you're slow and you didn't even realize it because the flight control system was so smooth. And did you feel connected to the airplane? Is it easy to squeeze to do that with it?
Yeah, so I'm the sort of person when I first start flying an aeroplane, I'm very mechanical, up, down, left, right, and I try to get competent in something, so I'm not going to crash it and kill myself first, and then I'll have a bit of a go and try something different, and that came a lot quicker with the Hornet because I'm a third tourist by now, and I've done it a couple of times before. I describe. I use this quote. I'm very proud of this quote. I said that when I flew the Hawk, maybe not so much with the Phantom because I don't think I had enough time on it. When I flew the Hawk, I felt like the aeroplane was an extension of my hands and feet. And I know a lot of pilots say that phrase, but that's what I felt with the Hawk. I felt like I was wearing it, and it was an extension of me. By the end on the Hornet, but probably by about 6 months into proper flying it, I felt like the Hornet was an extension of my imagination. That's a completely different thing. So, like I say, I put the stick front right, and it does it for me. I mishandled it, showed it no respect whatsoever in some flights that I did, and it still did what I was hoping it was going to do. And that's the kind of way I try and get it across. It was an extension of my imagination. If I ended up slow, I ended up slow. It wasn't going to depart on me. If I ended up supersonic, I was supersonic, and it felt exactly the same in the cockpit because of that flight control system. I guess.
So what I'm trying to understand then is what would be behind the Marine Corps or the US generally, their approach towards doing things by the numbers. Then there are It sounds condescending to say they're intelligent people. It's their aeroplane. They designed this tech. They are,
Yeah,
they know what they're doing. Why would they have such a prescribed manner of operating the aeroplane when someone like you or the Aussie or anybody else could come along from a different community and show them actually they'd be more successful if they relaxed the
yeah.
way
Okay,
of
so
doing things?
it's a generalization. So that's how I was taught on my workup, and I was taught on the RAG. So I think that comes from a sort of a necessity, in that out of out of TAC weapons training in the Royal Air Force, your average student is at that level, because TAC weapons was a huge learning curve. And what we did was we produced almost like pairs leaders out of TAC weapons. They then went on to an OCU and a front line and were pairs leaders for quite a bit down the line. But our students came out of TAC weapons sharper than they were going to be probably for the next 18 months or so.
Really?
So that's the level of your average RAF student out of TAC weapons. I think the level of your average Marine Corps student out of flying training was down at that level there. And therefore, workups needed to be a little bit more prescribed. If there's any Marines watching this now, that is a generalization, and that's just an observation of what I saw. So very quickly on my first squadron, the boss made me an air combat training instructor. The XO had done a Phantom exchange in the UK, and so he knew the quality of TAC weapons training. And he said, "You've been teaching air combat attack weapons stuff?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Right, we need to make him an ACTI as soon as he's through his workup." So I went through the workup, which is all quite prescribed because we're dealing with the guys at that level. And I became an ACTI unofficially. I hadn't done the 3-week course. They just kind of signed me off. So then I ended up flying against a lot of these new guys that are coming onto the squadron. And that was my observation. And so I guess that was why the workup was on numbers. That doesn't mean to say that, when I got to this reserve unit, people weren't flying on numbers. They were flying on their imagination. So it took a bit of experience to get to that point. I don't want people to go away with the impression that the Marine Corps flew the Hornet on numbers every day and it was a yardstick Hornet, but that was what workup was like. And I guess when you've got a machine like that can do spectacular things, you have to start somewhere. Otherwise, people will get themselves into all sorts of trouble with it.
You've referenced it a couple of times now, just to check then. So this time where you said there wasn't an envelope and then you had the one opportunity to discover that maybe there was. Was that the one where you were talking about where you pushed the stick, or is that a different? Are you talking about?
No, this is a different one. I got caught out by being so confident in the aeroplane and my ability in the aeroplane as well. I was on my first squadron, so I had this OV-10 guy in the back, and I was working him up a little bit, and he was coming on great in the air-to-air environment. That sounds very patronising. He was a very sharp guy in his job as a FAC-A. We were just trying to turn him into a fighter WSO. So we went out against one of these young Marines who was on workup, and we do the prescribed trip, and a lot of the workup would see one of the aeroplanes pretending to be a bandit and the other one being the fighter. And we do perch work, where one would be out the front, you turn in, and that was that. And the guy out the front would maybe not be allowed to use afterburner on this particular split in order to give the guy confidence that he can fight his aeroplane and that sort of thing. And then we'd just kind of have at it and do Hornet against Hornet. But one of the exercises we did was called the guns defense, guns D it was called. So you start out the front like this. The aeroplane comes in from about 1.5 miles away, taking shots. You break into them, and as he saddles up for guns, you do a hard break into him. If he comes nose off, you're probably going to end up going into a rolling scissors defensive maneuver like that. But the general thing is he's going to keep the sight on, and you go into a guns D, which is 135 degrees angle of bank, pull hard to 7.5 G, which is what our G limit was, and then see what happens after that. And then the guns D generally gets knocked off. It was that initial maneuver and to make sure you didn't go through the base heights and that sort of thing there. Oh God, I say, if he goes nose off, you go into a rolling scissors. The Hornet doesn't do a normal rolling scissors. It does this batshit crazy 3D tree rolling scissor extravaganza. It's just not real. So just want to throw that out there. So anyway, I set it up, and he does a guns D first. I put him under pressure, and then I'm going to give him the opportunity to take advantage of somebody. So I might end up going through a guns D as to see whether he can track me through that guns defense. So anyway, the idea is he's done everything on numbers. It's gone really well. So what I want to do is I want to mix it up for him. So the problem that he had was he was great when it ran on rails, like we all are. But when something unusual happened, he kind of went to pieces a little bit. So what I'm trying to do is introduce the unusual to him, but without telling him. So I stand up out the front, and I start the turn, and he comes in. And what I do is I do a little bit of deception. I call no joy, meaning I've lost sight of him, which I haven't, and I don't pull as much as I normally would do. So my airplane's not going to come across like that. It's going to go like that. He's going to think, oh my God, I'm hacking the corner here. So he's going to take a bigger bite of the cherry, which is exactly what he did. It's just a little bit of deception that we played around with. And he'll end up, when I break back into him properly, with a shitload of angle off, which he won't be able to track through the guns D. So he'll come nose off, and instead of me doing this, I'm going to do this very, very slow speed flick back to the left to see if I can flush him out of the front. What he should do is take his energy vertical and leave me for dead, but he won't. I guarantee he's gonna bite off on it and then not be able to deal with it. Nobody's ever done this before, so he's never seen anything like this before. So that's what. So I tell the guy in the back, "This is what I'm going to do," and he kind of goes, "Okay, Tug," because he's kind of learning on the job as it is. And I said, it's going to be a lot of G snapping, but the other way, so just be ready so you don't crick your neck and all that. He takes a huge bite, okay, and then I come hard in towards him, and as he flies through, I flicked the aeroplane left, full backstick, full left aileron, and full rudder. And I was back at idle at this point to try and make the closure even more. Slammed the throttles to burner at exactly the same time, and the left-hand engine surged. This thing with jet engines, flame out the back very good, flame out the front very bad. So we had this huge flame out the front, and the aeroplane yawed. Flicked, and we departed. And you go in some to depart a Hornet, but we departed. The bloody AOA warning was on. The displays come up telling you which way to point the stick after it's departed, and such like that. And we've got an engine that I've got to shut down because it surged. There was all very, very unpleasant. And then I just let go of the stick, and the aeroplane recovered itself. So it obviously thought that the chimp-fingered baboon in the front has let go. I'll rise my turn now. It recovered for us, and no kidding, this sounds like some crap Top Gun story. It's not. No kidding. He did fly out the front. Okay. And as I was cracking on, shutting down the left-hand engine, I took a sidewinder shot on him and shot him down, because a kill's a kill when it comes to it, and then relit the left-hand engine, apologized to the guy in the back, and we were very quiet flying back, and then in the debrief, we were fessed up to what we were doing. The other guy shoved his tape in, and there it was. Our aeroplane went like that with a big flame coming out the front, and then departed. And then the next thing is he flashed past us. So it looked pretty spectacular on the film. But oh God, we were shitting ourselves. Not my predecessor, not his, but the one before. I think it was the very first Hornet exchange. the guy had flown out of Hawaii. I mean, what an exchange! Yeah, F-18s in Hawaii at Kaneohe Bay, and he'd departed a Hornet, and he was a very capable ex-Lightning and Phantom guy. He tried every spin recovery action that he'd ever been taught in his Royal Air Force career, and ended up ejecting out of the Hornet. I mean, he was a cool guy, nice guy, and a very capable pilot. I get in there, depart the aeroplane, and just kind of let go, and got away with it. So yeah, that was my one-time spearing outside the envelope.
What's the or are there any repercussions on you for doing that then? So did you? My understanding of the Navy and Marine culture is that they're if it's not written that you can't do it, then you can give it a go. It's slightly different. So did anybody come and have a word with you about that? Did you have a word with yourself about that?
Yeah. So I've always been a kind of mea culpa sort of guy. So if I do something wrong, I'm always the first to point it out in a debrief, because I think if you do that, it takes the sting out of it. You're going to get railed on for this, but if you take the sting out of it first, it's not quite as bad. But afterwards, it's worse, because you're the person that is your biggest critic, or you should be. And therefore, I always beat myself up over these things. Bearing in mind, I was actually the duty adult on that trip. So I was even though I probably didn't even have 200 hours on the Hornet at that point, I was the experienced air combat instructor on the trip. And so I suppose part of it in the debrief is you role model how you want people to debrief as well. And the start of the debrief was me holding my hand up. Apologise to my backseater in public in the debrief, and to the other guys, that this is what I did, this is what I tried to do. Yeah, all right, I could have gone, wasn't my fault that the engine surged, but I didn't. I said I tried something not stupid, I tried something unusual that the aeroplane couldn't handle. I abused the aeroplane, and you know what? It slapped me in the face, and I probably deserved that. I'm glad we came out of it. This is, a lesson for me more than anybody else. But this is not quite the Carefree handling airframe and engine that maybe I thought it was. I don't think I didn't get any. Didn't even have to talk to the training officer or anything like that. Shared it around the squadron, particularly the Australian guy, because he was more akin to us, and he was very experienced. He was a 1,000-hour guy, so just chatted through it with him as well.
Can you tell us a little bit about the general philosophy behind, Carefree versus don't abuse the aeroplane side of things? Because to an outsider, you hear about an aeroplane that has full authority digital fly-by-wire control. It's supposed to prevent you from departing the aeroplane or doing anything that's going to unnecessarily sort of jeopardize safety of flight or whatever it is. You hear about the development of engines. They want to develop the F-100 engine for the F-15 initially had lots of issues with compressor stalls, AB burn throughs. They revised that engine to provide carefree throttle movement for the pilot. All of the design philosophy around these airplanes seems to be that they want you to be able to do whatever you want to do.
Yeah,
the airplane's going to keep you, within the constraints of what's practical. So when you have a situation like that where you are, not with sort of reckless or abandon, you are thinking, well, actually, this is a learning opportunity, and if I can do this, I can teach him that might happen. That sounds like a legit thing to do. What does it do for your confidence then, and how did you mentally approach the challenge of flying the airplane to the maximum but not abusing it?
Yeah, so I think it was a legit thing that I was trying to do. I suppose with this whole carefree handling and carefree throttle handling, that's all well and good, but the laws of physics are the laws of physics, aren't they? So lift and drag, thrust and weight, they're not up for debate. They are what they are. And the thing with engines, shit happens. That's just how it is. If the left-hand engine had not surged, that wouldn't have happened. But but that's that. Engines do surge. We can plan it as much as we like. We can engineer it as much as we like. But shit will happen, and there is always like I say, a chimp finger baboon who'll try and work their way out of any envelope that you put in there. I suppose if the engine had not surged at that point, and I'd have not departed the aeroplane, what would have been next? That would have been the thing that I would have been thinking about. Would I have got myself into would I have tried that down at low level? In which case we wouldn't have got out of it. We would have had to have ejected. So each time something like that happens, as much as you expect it's not going to happen, it will at some point. There's a little reset in your mind that I wouldn't say I was any more gentle with the aeroplane after that. I never tried that move again. It was a bit of a one-off. It worked. Hell's bells. It was great for a gun's defense, but like I said, it's a bit of a one-off. And so then maybe there's other things that happen that make you a little bit more circumspect. I almost went off the end of the runway at Chicago Midway, and caused a diplomatic incident. That would have been there. But that was due to a high and fast approach where I got caught out by something else. My pride stopped me from going round, and almost went off the end of the runway. These things happen. Mostly you get away with the stuff, and sometimes you don't. You just got to roll with whatever happens, and here I am. Still here today. I didn't eject out of the Hornet. I didn't crash in a Hornet. And it might be because these near misses managed to reset my my mindset a little bit, or just enough that I didn't get to that position again. It never reset me down to the first trip on the rag again. There's always it's almost like a save point in a video game, isn't it? When you get to a certain point, that's where your experience is, and that's what happens. Then you get killed, so you go back to that point there and you build from that point rather than from the start of the game again.
It's interesting listening to you say that. I remember
that's not a bad analogy, is it? I don't just
I'm quite impressed that you play video games that have save points. I have to assume your son or something or a daughter must have told you about that. That can't have been.
I don't play games anymore. When we bought a Nintendo Wii when my youngest daughter was oh god, what was she, 8 years old? When I was unbeatable on it. She was still at the stage where she was licking the television screen, I think. So I was absolutely unbeatable on it. She's 25 now, 26, and I refuse to play video games with her now because I'm nowhere near her.
It is interesting though, just as a reflection to hear you talk about that sort of the peaks and troughs emotionally and psychologically around being a fighter pilot. One of the things that stood out for me when we were talking and reading your book as well is, from the beginning of your journey where you're doing the sort of the learn and dump, I think you called it, in order to get through the F4 training course, and then getting on your first operational squadron, and then going through as an instructor, which we've skipped over, and we'll come back and talk about that in a separate episode. But you'd said to me offline you'd started to back yourself at that point. One of the things that you'd said to me about flying the F4 was that you had this love affair with it, and then sometimes something would happen that would remind you actually it's a machine, it's a bunch of moving parts. And you talked about an engine failure where you had the same thing, flame out the back good, flame out the front bad. You described that, and I wondered then, was there ever a steady state emotionally for you? Do you ever get to a point where you're not on a roller coaster of I know what I'm doing, oh shit, it's all gone wrong, or something's gone wrong and it's knocked me back down again? Is there ever a point, or did you ever get to a point in your fast jet career where you were steady state?
I think it mostly was steady state, to tell you the truth, Steve. But we tell the stories because they're the ones that have the most meat in them, and they're interesting. Generally, life on a fast jet squadron, people would be amazed at how tedious it can be. So when you first start flying fighters, you dream of being able to do the final trip on the OCU, which is a 2v2, 2 versus 2 intercepts, and you have to coordinate your pair of airplanes against 2 other airplanes on the radar. And you think, there's no way I'll be able to do that. 2v2 on a fast jet on a fighter squadron it's a cookie cutter. We do it every day. It's like it's probably like a 4-ship attack, low level dropping bombs for a GR1 squadron. It's just with a 10-second split over the target. That's just bread and butter for us. So a lot of it is steady state, but not so steady state that you think, oh yeah, I've got this cracked. I don't need to turn up mentally for this. It's only steady state because we're up for it. I suppose if you ever walk the airplane thinking the same as yesterday, those are the days when you're going to get caught out. In my experience, anyway, I don't think I ever walked for an aeroplane thinking same as yesterday, Groundhog Day sort of thing. I always had this thing of right, turn on, otherwise, the aeroplane could kill you, let alone you. Yeah. But mostly, I don't want you to get the impression that we're constantly on a roller coaster of ultimate highs into a almost crashing the aeroplane thing. Most of it is on a level. And then there's just these, it's like a heartbeat, there's a peak and a trough, and as you go through. But I tell you what, it'd be a sad old bloody job if it was steady state the whole time, wouldn't it? We need these, I call them moments of gold. Shooting the gun in the Hornet for the first time solo, that was a moment of pure gold for me. If I'd have died and gone to heaven at that moment, I would have accepted that I'd had a good life. That was how magical that moment was. Almost departing the aeroplane and almost having to eject. That's a low moment, But it all adds to the piece. All adds to your experience to help you maintain basically a steady state most of the time.
So we need to conclude at some point. So can I just ask you then, before we do that? And we got back in touch again, sort of fairly recently, and then you sent me this message about the fact you were writing your Hornet book, and you've got the stories, and they've come to the top of your mind, which is great. And then you'd said, well, I didn't mean to make it sound like you were plugging your book. So I know you're not plugging your book, but we should let people know you have got a Hornet book coming out, and when it comes out, we'll make sure they know where they can get it and what it's called.
It's at least 12 months away, which is why I said this is not a plug, but because I've got the stories, this is the time to do it.
So tell us a story or two then. What I mean, obviously some have to be saved for the book, but is there one that stands out in your mind as the one that you would tell if you were asked to pick only one?
Yeah, my perfect weekend in an aeroplane, or perfect weekend in a flying suit. It's probably a 15-minute story though. That's the only snag. So
if you're happy to tell it,
okay. So I'm on the reserve unit, and I'm one of only 2 permanent members on the reserve unit. The rest are airline guys who fly airliners and come and lead a 4-ship of Hornets at the weekend. It was absolutely brilliant. A good bunch of people. The OPSO was a full-time Marine, and I worked alongside and for him. That's where they slotted me in. So he's the acting boss when the reserve boss isn't there. And then he went on the Top Gun course for about 4 months. So I was acting boss, in inverted commas, of a Hornet squadron as a flight lieutenant at 12 aeroplanes, 150 people, when the reserve boss wasn't there. I wasn't really the boss, but that was how it kind of transpired. So I loved that squadron. It was VMFA 134, the smokes, and they were absolutely brilliant. So anyway, one day the OPSO dog said to me, he said, I'm taking a couple of jets on the road. I want to take a couple of jets on the road for the weekend. They did this all the time. They'd fly at the weekends back to Indianapolis, where my family are. Would you like to come? Now, I didn't really go on the road at the weekend because I lived in Ocean Beach in San Diego. I wanted to be on the beach with my family and stuff like that. I didn't want to be flying and getting stinking sweaty at the weekend. And but I really like this guy. So I said, oh, yeah, okay, then. He said, my family live in Indianapolis. And he said, so every year, Tug, we have family tickets to the Indy 500. I wondered whether you wanted to come and watch it. And I went, you're kidding, right? And he went, no, the Indy 500 is the greatest motor race in the history of the world, you know. And I was a real motor racing nut. So I said, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, let's do that. The only thing is, we can't leave on Friday because Miramar's closed. We have to go on Thursday night. Where do you want to go? So we looked at the map and I said, well, Chicago's not far away from there. I've never been to Chicago before, so that's what we did. Anyway, he said, oh, my cousin works for the mayor of Chicago. I'll get him to book us into Midway. Oh, fantastic. Great. Oh, my college buddy, he lives just outside Chicago. I'll get him to come and we'll stay with him. So it was all sorted. And then as we briefed up, we went into Tinker first for a refuel in Oklahoma, and then up to Midway. Midway's like a postage stamp, and it's right on the edge of the skyscrapers. And there's a warning that there used to be a chimney on finals, so you had to do a slightly steeper approach. Now we're going in as a single speaking element to cut down the drama with air traffic. But at some point, we need to separate. The runway is pretty short, so we don't want to do a pairs landing. So I've got to separate out by about half a mile. But they keep us together right until the end, and then they say we can separate out. We're already dirtied up with the gear and flaps down. So I've got to do these horrific bloody S-turns behind Dog to try and make some separation. And I don't make a lot at all. The next thing is I see him balloon up like this. What the hell's going on? And there's a face full of chimney right in front of me. So I ended up ballooning even higher, and now I'm steep and I'm going to be fast landing. So rather than go around, which would cost an absolute fortune and be massively embarrassing, I'm figuring I can do this. I start side slipping the aeroplane to lose height, and oh God, it's all a bit of a drama. I clatter onto the end of the runway, and I end up overtaking Dog. As he's slowing down on the runway, I overtake him. I'm stamping on the brakes. And this sounds like some crap Hollywood film, but my nose cone went over the end of the runway. And it's a 6-lane highway outside the fence there. So, you know, my heart was absolutely pounding. Now, the F-18 nose wheel casted to 90 degrees, thankfully, because I was able to just edge around like that. And we taxi into the VIP parking area. And as I climb out, the ground crew guy goes, hey, you know, look great on landing, the pair of you. You should have been at the end of the runway I was at, mate, I was thinking. And then he said, that's your boss there, just getting airborne. And this Falcon biz jet got airborne. I said, what do you mean the boss? He said, the Secretary of State is in the, oh, Jesus Christ, you know. So that would have been a major diplomatic incident with that. Anyway, we jump in the cars with these two guys that have met us. And I noticed on one of the pants there was a 727 there, and it had the Miami Heat logo on the tail, you know, the basketball team. Now, as I arrived in the States, Michael Jordan came back to the world of basketball for the Chicago Bulls, and I thought it was too good a story not to miss. So I watched everything with the Bulls and with Jordan, and the Bulls were playing the Miami Heat in the playoffs. And I said to this guy who worked for the mayor, I said, oh, Christ, of course the Bulls are playing the Heat. And he said, you like basketball, Tom? I said, yeah, I love it. I've been watching it since I got here. He said, do you want to go to the game tonight? I said, oh, you know, you can't get tickets, he said. So I work for the mayor of Chicago. So they take us into town, and we go into a bar in flying suits, which was always, I was always a little bit wary of with the IRA threat back at home. Well, we walk in, everybody stops talking. And then the barman says to this guy who works for the mayor, he said, hey, John, he said, who are these guys? Oh, these are Marine Corps fighter pilots. The bar starts applauding, starts buying us drinks. So we end up shit-faced. And the next thing is we end up going to the United Center and to watch the Bulls game. This head of security was a Marine Corps door gunner in Vietnam in a Huey helicopter. So he said, I'm sorry, guys, I've got your nosebleed seats, but come with me. They took us out onto the Bull's head on the court for our picture taken. 18,000 people, and the announcer goes, ladies and gentlemen, on the Bull's head now, your Marine Corps fighter pilots, standing ovation and this sort of thing. I just thought, oh my God, this is just absolutely awesome. And then the teams ran out right in front of me. So where my laptop is right now, that's how close Michael Jordan was running out in front of me. So we had that. We had this, and We watch the game. The next day we leave Midway to go into Indianapolis, and Dog's family are on the ground at Indianapolis. So he said, we'll separate into singletons, Tug. We'll just do a couple of flyby circuits. So you do whatever you want. Now we have this thing that this is like 1v1. It's a competition between people. If he goes low, I've got to go lower. Completely unprofessional. There's me saying about what professional aviator I was. Absolute bullshit. So he goes in and he does a low fly past, and so I go in and do a different one, and we head out to initials again. Away from the airfield, and we pass on the way. I'm on the way out. He's on the way in. Holy shit! I mean, he was low, so I figured, right, I've got to get lower. I start running in. You know what the Goodyear blimp is?
Yeah.
It's the big airship that does all the aerial shots, and it's there for the Indy 500. That's been given clearance to lift and hold, and it's between the runway and where we would be downwind. I think I went in about 30 feet or something like that. I hadn't twigged that the blimp was there, and broke at 7G. I mean, straight into the Goodyear blimp, and ended up barrel rolling over the top of this. I'm coming out in a sweat right now. Barrel rolled over the top of it, did a shit landing because I was crapping myself, because I don't learn from these things. And we go and watch the Indy 500, and so in 2 days, almost 2 diplomatic incidents, but easily the best weekend I've ever spent in a flying suit. And it was the Marines and the Hornet that gave me that.
Okay, Tug, I'm out of time, so I need to wrap up. But I wanted to say thanks very much indeed for joining us again. It's been great to see you again after all this time. I know that you've got a lot more to talk about in terms of your posting to the Reserve Squadron. So will you come back and talk to us about that again?
I'd love to. To tell you the truth, that second half of my tour on that reserve unit was the absolute time of my life, and I've got, I think I've got stories that will last me a lifetime after that experience. They were brilliant guys, brilliant aeroplane, and it was just the best time of my life as an aviator. So I'd love to, keep. As long as you keep recording, I'll keep talking. How's that?
Fantastic. Well, I know that everyone will keep listening too. So that sounds great. Well, we'll get that booked, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Super. Look forward to it.
Cheers, Doug.